I'm a huge failure. I've spent years learning about game dev, watching videos about it, and even trying to learn how to use game engines like Unity and Godot. But guess what? I haven't even made one single game, and I got sick of it. So I decided I would join a game jam and I would make a game, no matter what. In case you don't know what a game jam is, it's a competition where developers make games based around one theme. And that theme can actually be anything. However, the interesting part is that they have to do it in some specific amount of time. It can be a day, a week, or even a month, but they have to do it in time. So I found this one jam called Beginners Jam Summer 2026, and I decided it was perfect for me because 1, it's for beginners and I'm a beginner, and 2, it lasts for 7 days, which is a rather short amount of time, but it's actually convenient for me since I'm a lazy person and I need some pressure to keep me working hard, you know? The thing is, the theme was trash. The theme was actually trash. And I quite liked that theme, so I decided to get to work. First, I had to come up with an actual idea for the game. It really needed to be something simple, cause, after all, it was gonna be my first game. So I ended up going with a game where trash would fall from the sky and you would have to pick it up before it reached the ground. But I decided this idea was still missing something to be a little bit more interesting. So, inspired by Papers, Please, which is a game I like a lot, I decided to make it so that after each day, new rules would be set to try and spice things up. For instance, maybe you would get a message from your superior telling you not to collect cans on the next day, for whatever reason. To begin, I modeled the protagonist using Blender, and I have to tell you, I'm a total beginner when it comes to Blender, so I apologize in advance if you know more than I do and spot me doing any kind of atrocity during this video. I made our protagonist a recycling bin, inspired by some images I found. In particular, this one I imported into Blender as a reference, because the bin had wheels, which was perfect as I figured it would make movement seem more natural. The style I tried to go for was this now trending PSX style that's being used a lot in horror games. It's essentially a style reminiscent of older PS1 era games. Really a simple way of creating assets fast while being a total Blender novice like me. Perfect for this jam. Also, I used libresprite, a free sprite fork, to make textures for my bin. This and other textures you'll see on this video were probably very poorly optimized, but I didn't really have the time to worry about that, and I didn't think it was gonna produce any real issues at these lower resolutions, to be honest. That being said, I had a really hard time trying to make movement animations for my model in Blender. I knew what I wanted and could even sort of do it, but I was totally lost when it came to actually saving the animations and all that stuff. I really freaked out. That's when I remembered that today's video true hero, Godot, the engine I was planning to use for the game, had a very powerful animation system that maybe I could use here, instead of doing it in Blender. And thankfully, it turns out I was right. The animation player node in Godot was more than enough for these particular animations, which were very simple animations, yes, but just right for what I needed. What I needed was essentially just an animation for when the player is moving and also a more subtle one for when the player is not moving, to kind of try and bring this recycling bin to life. It was at this point that I decided that in the lore of my game this would be a sentient garbage collection robot. And after all that freaking out about animations, I stopped working on the game for the day. On the second day of the jam, I started by modeling the trash that would fall from the sky. I went for the classics when it comes to trash, such as some cans, a banana peel, a plastic bottle, and a bomb. Because why not? It's always good to have a bomb asset available, just in case. Then I imported everything into Godot, and after checking everything looked okay, I started working on the movement system for our protagonist. And now the bin could move, but it still was missing our beautiful animations, so I added them. Without much trouble, the animations were working. But I also wanted the player to match the direction it was moving in and kind of flip based on that. While I was trying to implement this, I made a rookie mistake that essentially flipped the character every frame, which was a bit funny actually, but I eventually managed to solve it by making sure before flipping the player that it wasn't already flipped. Yeah, very advanced engineering here, I know. After that, I tweaked the resolution of the game so that it would resemble an older game a bit more, going for the classic 4:3 aspect ratio, and this was also a good design decision actually, for reasons we're gonna learn in a bit. But hey, Wait a minute, the player can leave our screen. That's not very chill of him, man. We have to do something to stop him. But first, while I was at it, I figured our world was feeling a little too empty, so I created some basic landscape for our game to happen in. You can tell I'm lazy because I used the old trick of duplicating my trees and tweaking them a little to try and make it seem like they weren't all the same tree. Let me know if I succeeded in the comments. I imported our little landscape to Godot, but it still didn't look quite right to me. So I went and added a big city skyline background to the mix. It was just a plain image, but that's okay because players aren't gonna be getting any close to it anyways. However, I was still missing something. What could it be? Of course, clouds. So I added some clouds too, and again, used the ancient technique of tweaking them so that it would appear that I took the time to model various types of clouds. After that, I decided to call it a day. The first thing I did the next day was remembering our player could still escape the game, and I finally constrained it so that it would be trapped inside of our screen forever and ever. It did that funny video gamey thing where you can't move but still do your movement animation, and I left it like that because honestly it makes the game all the more old school. Heck, there are even modern games where this still happens. With that out of the way, it was finally time to add the most important thing to our game: trash. First, I tried to create some sort of dictionary where the trash data would be, but I very quickly realized that wasn't the best solution at all. That's when I remembered something I had learned in my time consuming game dev content. Godot had something called custom resources that were supposedly pretty great. I then proceeded to watch some tutorials on how to create these custom resources, and they honestly seemed perfect for the job of adding various types of trash to the game. So, with that, I finally had a folder with all my trashy resources inside. I then added some code so that when trash spawns, it randomly picks one kind of trash from the trash array I created. Then I made it so that after a certain amount of time, trash would spawn above the player in a random location. It felt a little bit boring and scripted, so I also made it so that when trash spawns, it's rotated randomly. Still boring, so I also made it spin. However, our trash was still doing something weird. Yeah, something very fishy. Yep. So I made it stop once it reached the ground. Then I added collisions for the player too, so that you could actually pick up the trash. I spent a good while adjusting everything to make it feel as fair as possible, and while the result may have not been perfect, I think it came out well enough for my first game. I then decided the static clouds were looking pretty weird, so I gave them movement. It's essentially a constant horizontal movement, and they go back to the other side of the screen once they get out of sight. After that, I figured, since my game was going to be based around different levels having different regulations, I had to have some kind of time system. That's when I learned how to use twins and created a pretty basic day and night cycle. Though I didn't do night, so I guess mine was more of a day and afternoon cycle. I managed to do it by progressively changing the sky color as well as the amount of light in the scene. Then I started working on a very simple UI. I experimented for a bit and managed to get a timer that would tell you how much time was left till the end of the day. Before I stopped working on the game for the day, I decided to add another layer to the background, this time with some distant mountains that made the city seem further away. And that was it for that day. On the fourth day, I tweaked the UI a little bit and decided my game was going to work around errors. If you let trash reach the ground, that would be counted as an error. And if you catched something that you weren't supposed to catch because of those special regulations we talked about, then that would be counted as an error as well. The error counter was working, but I thought it needed some more life. So, making use of my newest tool, twins, I was able to spring some life into them. After that, I started working on the actual game loop. First, I made it so that you could start and end the day with some functions. Then, I added a simple start screen that prompted you to press enter to start the game. When that was done, I made a report that would appear at the end of each day to tell you how many errors you had made and also give you information on what you had to do the next day. Information that, of course, includes those new rules that would be added on a daily basis. This information would come disguised as your operator's feedback to kind of integrate the gameplay into the game's world. With all the user interfaces I had created, all that was left was to actually create the levels. This time I did use dictionaries, because it made more sense to me that way. Although maybe I could have also created some custom resources for the levels. Regardless, I did create an array containing different dictionaries that would essentially be the different days or levels of the game. These days would contain stuff like good and bad message variants that are displayed depending on how many errors you made throughout the day. A message that would appear no matter what, that would be the one containing any information regarding what to do on the next day, like what to collect and what not to collect, and also other useful parameters, like how many errors you could make and an array with the name of the stuff that you couldn't collect on that day, which was actually a simple array of strings. I then had to adjust the UI a little bit so that it could fit all the text, and I also went ahead and actually created all the levels, which were 7 in total, representing a week in the game's story. Then I added a way for you to alter the spawn rate of trash each day so that I could also tweak the difficulty and make it higher the more you progressed. Then I made it so that for story reasons bombs wouldn't spawn every day and just on the 7th day, which would make bombs kind of the final boss of the game. I had a lot of trouble creating particles for when the bomb exploded because Godot has 2 kinds of particles: CPU particles that use your processor and GPU particles which use your GPU. I understand that GPU particles are superior because almost every tutorial I could find was using them, but my research showed that GPU particles could cause issues when I exported my game to be playable on a web browser, and when you make a game for a game jam, it's very recommended that it can be played on the browser, so I wanted to use the CPU particles. After a lot of tweaking, I managed to make the bombs explode and generate some particles when falling to the ground. But even in the final game, I still noticed the game freezing for a bit the first time these particles spawned. I think this is the kind of thing that you can solve with loading screens, but it wasn't such a big deal in my opinion, so I left it like that. After that, I created the UI for the game over screen that would display all the different endings, and created a function to end the game and show that screen. I then made it so that you lost after making 5 errors on a single day, and got the bad ending, where they disassemble you because you're malfunctioning. Also, I added the possibility to retry each level from the game over screen, so that you wouldn't have to start the game from scratch each time you lose. Up to this point, I was never cleaning up the trash that falls to the ground, and that really was starting to get weird now that you could restart the level, so I had to find a way to remove all trash once a level ends, and I did it by using something called groups. Every time a trash node was created, it was added to a group, so if I wanted to delete all those nodes, I just had to go through the group and delete everything. To add some more variety to the scenery, I made it so that each time the day started or restarted, clouds would be placed in a random spot. After that, I created some illustrations for the different endgames. And don't judge them too harshly because I'm not very experienced when it comes to drawing, and also I'm only using a mouse for all this stuff. With that, I had finished my game over screens. I also made it so that you would instantly blow up upon catching a bomb, and fixed some bugs that had appeared with all these changes. With that, the very productive 4th day of the jam came to an end for me, and I was very happy because the game was pretty much done. But there was still a very important part missing. On day 5, I essentially took care of the sound effects, music, and some finishing touches for the game. Polishing, if you will. I downloaded some free-to-use sound effects from freesound.org and Pixabay, which I later credited, and edited them using Audacity. For the music, I used beepbox and tried to go with something simple because I wanted to do the music myself, but I'm not a musician by any means. It's not great, but I made it so that you could mute the music by pressing M, so that it wasn't a problem if it was actually damaging your ears. Implementing all this audio stuff was very straightforward in Godot. Their audio stream player node is really wonderful and intuitive to work with. Godot, in general, has been amazing to work with during this project. I really cannot recommend it enough as a game engine. Then, once again invoking the magic of twins, I created a very simple intro sequence for my game, so that it would feel a little bit more cinematic, I guess. And also improved the title screen to actually show the title of the game, which I decided was gonna be Garbage Collection System. the name of the kind of robot the protagonist was. While I was doing all of this, I also adjusted the difficulty of the levels a lot to try and make it easier and more logical in how it evolved over the different in-game days. I did this by playtesting myself and trying to beat each level many times. Still, it was in this stage of the development process that I made what was probably my biggest mistake during this jam, but we'll talk about that later. On the next day, the game was almost done. I made it so that the player couldn't move while the game over screen was active, and with that I started working on exporting the game. As I said earlier, it's recommended for game jams that you export your games to be playable on the browser, so that's what I did. However, my final build was taking up to 42 megabytes of storage. That seemed like a bit too much for my game, so I researched a bit on the topic, and thankfully I found a YouTube video, which I'll link in the description by the way, that helped me reduce the size of my build to only 12 megabytes with the help of a great Godot extension called Reduce Web Build Size. With that, I finally uploaded my game to itch.io and submitted it to the jam. My game was generally well received. People mostly praised the graphics and gameplay, which I'm very happy about. However, the main criticism I got was that the last levels were way too difficult, mainly because the player's speed wasn't enough to reach distant trash, especially if you are on the other side of the level. Remember when I said the aspect ratio I picked had actually been a good design decision? Well, it's because of this. If the screen was any wider, these situations where you are picking trash at the leftmost side of the screen, and then you have to quickly move to the other side of the level to catch another incoming piece of trash, but aren't fast enough, so you end up not being able to pick up said piece of trash, would be all the more common. I did see this issue coming, because it happened a couple of times during playtesting. However, I didn't think too much about it because I was still able to beat all levels consistently. The thing is, and this is the greatest lesson I got out of this jam, when you are developing a game, even if it's a small game like this one, you spend a lot of time playing it. A lot more time than someone who just booted it up for the first time. So you're probably gonna do much better than them in terms of playing the game. So what I learned is that you have to assume that people are going to have a bit more of a hard time playing your game when compared to you, especially on a game jam, where people normally just want to play your game for a short while to try and give it a rating, and they have no actual intention to master it or anything like that. So, if you find something in your game difficult, people are going to find it very difficult. If you think something in your game is very difficult, then people will probably think it's nearly impossible, and maybe even stop playing because of that, which is what happened to some of my players on this occasion, so keep that in mind. And, if you can, get playtesters other than yourself, like friends or family, which is what I should have done. I'm sure they would have helped me realize the difficulty was indeed rather annoying before publishing the game. 58 games were submitted to the jam, and I have to say a lot of them were really cool, so I definitely recommend checking them out if you're interested. And my game ended up finishing 9th out of 58. I'm really happy about that result, to be honest. I never expected to do so well in my first jam. It even ended up being number 8 on the funness category. Even with those balancing issues that prevented some people from finishing my game, I'm very proud of this result and excited for what's to come. Overall, participating in my first game jam was an amazing experience. I learned a lot, had fun, shared with some great people, and most importantly, in my opinion, I saw a project through to the end and showed myself I can actually make a game and not just watch a lot of videos about it all day. All in all, if you, like me, are an aspiring game developer and you haven't participated in a game jam, or maybe you are not sure about doing it, I cannot recommend it enough, especially if your main problem is a lack of motivation. Just being forced to do a game in a specific time window was a great help for me, and I think it can be fantastic for you too. If you've actually watched this far for whatever reason, I cannot thank you enough. I'll try and post videos about my game development journey frequently, in case you're interested in that for some reason. Also, if you have any question for me or maybe some suggestions or just anything really, I'll make sure to read all the comments on this video, so you're very welcome to leave one. That would actually make me very happy. Till next time.